Now, I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. Christian Fuscarino is the executive director of Garden State Equality. You might recognize him as being part of our Pride at Work 2021 summit. Christian has deep roots in New Jersey, growing up in Belmar and spending much of his youth in and around Asbury Park. He's been an activist and organizer in the LGBTQ community for over a decade, and he credits his positive experiences in Asbury Park as helping influence him to become an activist. In 2016, Politico New Jersey named Christian the second most influential advocate in New Jersey politics, and later that year, The Observer listed him on their Power List 100. Now, Christian is obviously here to speak from an LGBTQ partner perspective about what it's like to be a milspouse. Christian, you will be in conversation with our amazing Rob Rebar. So gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you, Meg. Christian, you can feel free to turn on your camera. There you are. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I've had the good fortune to know you personally for several years. We've gone to Six Flags together, and I was also at your wedding to your husband, Aaron, who spoke to our community yesterday, and he was an active duty Marine at the time of your wedding. So definitely curious to hear your perspective as being an LGBTQ military spouse, and also the larger work that your organization has been doing with LGBTQ veterans and what we can all do to support that important community. So I'd love to kind of just start off by telling us a little bit more about yourself and specifically your work at Garden State Equality, both with a veterans community, but also with a larger LGBTQ community also.
Well, Rob, it's a pleasure to be with you. And yes, we've done a lot of fun activities over the year. And I want to thank you and your husband, your spouse, Guido, for all the work that you have done for the diversity and inclusion space, especially for LGBTQ advocacy. You both have contributed a great deal and have made the lives of so many, especially those from the LGBTQ military community, better. So thank you for your advocacy. It's really an honor to be with you today on this panel. For those watching, Rob, well, they read my bio in the beginning, which is always uncomfortable to sit through, but that's generally who I am. I am leading Garden State Equality, which is New Jersey's LGBTQ statewide organization. We are a member of the Equality Federation. So if you're tuning in from a state that's not New Jersey, know that you likely have a statewide equality organization there doing very similar work. So make sure you Google your state and the word equality, and typically they will pop up to figure out who's doing this work locally. I do have the unique perspective, though, of being a military spouse for someone who was active duty. We are still relatively rare in the military community, same-sex couples, especially for those who are male identified. And I like to joke when my spouse was getting out of basic combat training, a lot of spouses came for the graduation ceremony, and for a moment I thought I was at an LGBTQ pride festival because there are so many female couples embracing one another. Which was wonderful to see, especially considering we're not too many years out of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But for the male identified side, it was a lot less frequent. In fact, I'm not even sure if there was one other at that particular event. We did meet a few others over the years. And then as far as LGBTQ identified service members, we met many of them. But it's a rare occasion for there to be a married same-sex male identified couple. And what Rob was mentioning earlier was we actually had a traditional wedding ceremony that was a military wedding that took place at Trinity Church in Asbury Park. And that whole experience was something that neither myself or many others thought would ever be possible. In fact, when we were giving our vows to each other in this church, we mentioned very specifically that if it weren't for the decades of advocacy for the previous generation that sacrificed more so that we could have all of these rights and equalities and experiences, we wouldn't be standing there that day in a church, getting married to a same gender identified person at a military wedding. And so, and by the way, just to add more to that, fight for us to be able to love each other. We are an interracial couple. And so, Loving versus Virginia, another landmark case that without that being possible, our wedding would not have been a reality. And so we really grounded ourselves in the historical importance of all those who had sacrificed more so we could have that moment. And, for folks who are watching, figuring out, well, how can I be more supportive to military spouses? Our experiences are all not that different from those more traditional relationships. And so what we're going to talk about today really applies to many military spouse relationships, but there is this unique perspective that we are one of the few same-sex couples that exist within the U.S. military. Thankfully, more and more popping up every single day, thanks to equality and acceptance and us pushing progress forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think when you're talking about the history, there's even so many couples that we don't know about that are undocumented because of the trials that they were in at the time, because not being able to come forward. So while we stand on the shoulders of all these amazing people who were out at the time, and of course the same thing can be said of mixed race couples as well, but there are so many people who we just don't know about, who history has sadly forgotten. And I think that's what's so amazing about the legacy that we're trying to carry forward today, is we are uplifting those people that we don't know their names, but we still support and raise a glass to what they have done for us. And,
yeah, that's great. That's a great point, Rob. And I know you probably have a question ready, but I do just want to take a moment and stay with that because it's such a brilliant way of phrasing it. And we, there is the tomb of the unknown gay soldier that exists, or a grave marker, and I'm not so much a tomb, but a grave marker for the unknown gay soldier. And that's, the reality that there were the hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ identified service members since the inception of the US military who had to hide who they were, who died in combat, never fully being able to, be their true selves. And we can only do so much to right that wrong. But what we have tried to do here in New Jersey, and hopefully we'll see this happening at a national level with the Biden administration, is making sure that those who are still with us, who were dishonorably discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a discriminatory policy, who are currently living and not reaping the benefits of being a veteran, of being someone who stepped up and served our country. We are working hard here in New Jersey. We just passed a law that assists LGBTQ veterans that were dishonorably discharged. And essentially, we are working with them to help them get reclassified with obviously the federal government, because it's not military service is not state by state. So from a legal perspective, it's a little complicated, but there is now an initiative and an effort, a legal effort here in New Jersey to assist those veterans, because they've been missing out for years, some of them decades, on benefits that they are entitled to, from home ownership to education to tax benefits to being able to be a member of your local military association. They've missed out on so much, and unfortunately, we know from the broader veteran community, when you don't take advantages of those services, when you don't have community, what happens. And so, it's fair to say that unfortunately, a large percentage of LGBTQ veterans have had those negative experiences because of being ostracized and pushed aside due to the discriminatory policies like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the general ban that took place prior to instating that policy.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And that actually leads perfectly into the other thing I wanted to ask you, which is, there's an estimated more than 1 million LGBTQ Americans who are veterans. I'm sure that number is very underreported because, as we said, there's a lot of people who might not have be out and counted in that. So in your personal experience as someone who's worked in activism for a long time, who's also been married to a same-sex partner who was in active service and now is, married to a veteran, how have you seen that quality of respect and condition change and evolve for LGBTQ service people and also veterans? And then what kind of change or evolution have you seen, especially since the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was suspended?
Yeah, I smile at that statistic, Rob, because we were painfully reminded of the erasure of data that has taken place throughout our history as LGBTQ people when the Trump administration removed the LGBTQ identifiers from the 2020 census, which essentially mean we now are going to go through another decade where we don't truly know what any of the numbers actually are for the LGBTQ community like we do for other demographics. And so while we welcome the great studies that have taken place and the work that the Williams Institute has done to collect data, we'll never see it properly at a scale like we do with the census. And so I look forward to 2030 and hopefully righting that wrong. But it really, from health disparities to homelessness to bullying to providing government services to a community that experiences high rates of unemployment, we are at a disadvantage because of that lack of data. So I just want to highlight that, we have no idea how many LGBTQ service members there actually are, or how many LGBTQ veterans there are out there. And you're talking about still one of the deeper corners of the closet is the US military. And so even with the laws being right, that doesn't mean that the climate has changed. That doesn't mean that the level of acceptance has changed. That doesn't mean that it's any easier for someone as young as 18, an age when most people are still figuring out themselves, will feel comfortable joining the military and coming out within their time in service. And so there are a lot of variables to consider when talking about data. And we are moving in the right direction. But I will tell you from my personal experience, we, had been moving in a certain type of direction under the Obama administration. In fact, with, my spouse having participated in the first ever LGBTQ Marine Corps panel discussion, to the Trump administration rolling back hundreds of policies against the LGBT that would now be against the LGBTQ community, including an event like the panel discussion. So you had the panel discussion and then you didn't for the last 4 years under the Trump administration. It was kind of like, okay, we're going to move forward and then take a few steps back. Mm-hmm. And so how that translated to other service members, I can't speak to that. I can only speak to our experience. And while we never hid who we were, I can imagine that for service members who saw this progress and then who saw it rolled back, they may have acted out of fear and not have come out because of the fear of the transgender ban on the military. Well, there's a lot of conversations about what comes next. Is Trump going to reinstate Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or reinstate some type of policy that would discourage LGB folks from joining the military? And so when you look at ourselves as a whole community, then there was a lot of fear with the ban on trans troops. And so we went back. And now I'm feeling better, right? Because we have the Biden administration and transgender individuals can now join the military again. but I think we've lost 4 to 5 years of progress there, and we really should look at it like a gap in time. So we can't say, it's been X amount of years since Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We need to take that X amount of years and then subtract 4 or 5 from it, given the lack of progress that took place. Now, generally, is the culture changing? Is the climate changing in the military? Absolutely, right? Like, it's not this insular bubble where folks aren't connected to reality. I don't know what's going on. If I lost
you, I can hear you. You just for a second, but you're all
okay.
good.
Microsoft Teams just opened on my end, so I don't know what Microsoft and Zoom are in competition or something right now. But sorry about that. So they're not in this bubble, right? They're consuming media, and we have a lot more positive representation in media these days, especially on streaming platforms like Netflix, educational forums like this. Social media has, very positive campaigns about the LGBTQ community, and the younger generation, which has always been the case, is more accepting than the previous one. And so as you have a newer generation of young people signing up to serve their nation, you see a more levels of acceptance, a higher level of acceptance from that generation. And I can attest that when we were on base and we were at military functions together, it was more times, the older generation that would be standoffish or perhaps holding themselves back. The younger Marines, which in our case were sometimes 10 years younger than us. My spouse was an older Marine at that time, and they were thrilled to see us and very accepting. And in many cases, this is one of the most wonderful parts about the military is you join and you meet people different from you. We had folks from the backwoods of Kentucky that had never interacted with an LGBTQ person before in their lives, over for Thanksgiving, and sharing dinner with one another and talking about our experiences and our identities and who we are, and just open arms and excited to be in a space where folks looked and identified different than themselves. And so the culture is changing, and I am sure that as we move into the future and this younger generation continues to stay in the military and another generation moves into the military, it's just going to become more and more accepting. But it's still a dark corner of the closet, the military, because of the mentality and just the general environment that takes place, especially for male identified service members. It's just a very hyper masculine environment.
Totally. And then I think you brought up a great point in terms of media representation, because we've seen so much more media representation of LGBTQ people in general. We now have a LGBTQ superhero in the Eternals, but definitely I think military LGBTQ representation, and people could correct me, I'm sure there are examples out there, but that definitely seems like something that is still a little hidden, especially in terms of the spouse element, which is definitely what I also wanted to ask you about. Is today we've been focusing on military spouses and some of the challenges that can come from that. And I'm curious, as a military spouse yourself, when your partner was in the active duty Marines, what were some of the challenges, not just necessarily as a same-sex couple who and you being a spouse, but also just some of the challenges in general? Because I know you personally, you were living in 2 separate states, which I would imagine in onto itself was a bit of a challenge. And what are some of the ways that people or in companies and specifically can help ease that burden on spouses?
Yeah, and we were talking about representation and visibility, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is now a naval ship named after Harvey Milk. So progress. And Harvey Milk served in the Navy, so it was appropriate. But just a very cool thing that happened under the Obama administration and just became reality recently. So there is a failure on our government's part in providing resources to our veterans and military spouses. You need to really know your stuff to find services. It's not as simple as a Google search. You need a scholarly degree in Google to find some of these things. And it all doesn't exist on the same website, and it all doesn't exist on the internet. And you need to just poke and prod at things until you find maybe what you were looking for. And honestly, when I am looking for something, it's typically when I find something else. As it was related to a VA loan for a house, like I found that there were other things we could take advantage of. When I say take advantage of, I mean utilize the services that exist out there that we are entitled to as a military family. But we often, like, we don't have any children, right? And so I often think about how disadvantaged some military families are, that they have children and a lot of other responsibilities than just each other. And these services aren't easily accessible. And you really need to network and have friends and connections and folks to share with each other what is out there. And I would love to see that system improved. And we all know that the VA and other systems have a long way to go to really give veterans and family members the services that they are entitled to and need. But it's really hard to find the resources out there. And I say that as a military couple that has the same experiences as non-LGBTQ military couples. But the things that are out there, there's like a lot of great programs out there. And I'm not sure if it was on this Power to Fly session the other day, but someone was talking about just more support for military spouses. And again, like, I look at us, we don't have children. And so, we don't have folks that we are responsible to. I had a job when Aaron joined the military, but there needs to be a better network and more opportunities. So for companies that are watching, not only be actively recruiting veterans, but be actively recruiting military spouses who most likely share a great deal of the same ideals that veterans have that make them attractive to companies. It takes a lot of sacrifice to serve this nation. And, I always feel like it's cliche to say this as a spouse, but spouses sacrifice a great deal too. I say that as someone who has not sacrificed nearly as much as some of my peers have. Again, when you have a family and your significant other is overseas, not only are you the primary caregiver to your children at home, but you're also responsible for paying the bills and, taking care of the house and, holding down the family while your significant other is away. And it's a lot more responsibility than you would if your spouse was just at a job within the state. So however companies can recruit and hire veterans and military spouses, I would definitely invest more in that space. You're going to get really hardworking, dedicated individuals. And please recognize that military spouses spend a great deal of their time not only taking care of their family, but serving their country by supporting their spouse and being active in their communities.
That's all great points. And here at Power to Fly, we're definitely hoping that one of the silver linings to come out of COVID is this greater embrace of remote work, of flexible work. Countless studies, and I'm sure countless speakers over the course of the last 2 days have talked about the benefits of remote and flexible work, especially for military spouses who are often asked to move. And as you said, that's one thing when you're a singular person. When you have a family, that adds a whole other difficulty to that. But I would love to just, in closing, before we run out of time, if you can share anything else that Garden State Equality, your organization that you're executive director of, is doing specifically in the realm of LGBTQ veterans who definitely need this support.
Yeah, so we work on a wide variety of issues, from trauma to homelessness to accessing state services that the LGBTQ community historically has not had access to. And so all of those areas nearly, nearly every occasion are experiences that veterans will have as well. So in addition to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell assistance that we did here in the state, we're working on a wide variety of services that will improve the lives of LGBTQ veterans.
Wonderful. And I know we're just out of time, so I only realized this, Christian, after we started talking, but out on my desk, I actually see it every single day. I actually have a coaster of you and your husband that I got at your wedding. So it is a reminder of, all the wonderful work that you and Aaron have done and continue to do. So it makes I look at it every day and it makes me smile. So thank you.
Well, thank God for Etsy, and I'm glad you're able to be a part of that day with us. That meant so much. And Rob, I just want to plug another organization, if I can.
Of course.
The Modern Military Association of America is an organization that is dedicated to LGBTQ service members and their families nationally. And so actively engaging community groups like Garden State Equality locally and the Modern Military Association of America is a great way to recruit and do workforce development with communities that we've discussed on this program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences and all of the wisdom and everything that you have acquired over the last several years as being an activist and also living this experience as a military spouse. So thank you for all your sacrifices. Of course, we thank your husband as well for that. And thank you so much for being here today.
Rob, it's been a pleasure, and thanks to all the good work that Power to Fly is doing.
Thank you, Christian.